Chapter 1. The alarm blared, jolting Zane Corso awake. He glanced at the holographic display hovering above his wrist. Another temporal anomaly detected. Zane threw on his uniform, the fabric still damp from the previous day's mission, and rushed out of his cramped apartment. The streets of New Cascadia were already bustling with activity as Zane navigated his way through the crowd, dodging street vendors and weaving between the dilapidated buildings. The ever-present temporal storms loomed on the horizon, crackling with energy and distorting the very fabric of time. Zane arrived at the Temporal Anomaly Regulatory Agency, TARA, headquarters, a towering monolith of glass and steel that stood in stark contrast to the surrounding decay. He scanned his ID and stepped into the elevator, his mind already racing with the possibilities of what awaited him. As the doors opened, Zane was greeted by a flurry of activity. Analysts hunched over holographic displays, their faces illuminated by the glow of data streams. In the center of the room stood Director Alara Voss, her steely gaze fixed on the main screen. "Corso, you're late," Voss barked, not bothering to look at him. "Won't happen again, Director," Zane replied, taking his place at his workstation. "We've got a new anomaly, and it's a big one," Voss continued, gesturing to the map on the screen. "Sector 47, on the outskirts of the city. Reports indicate it's a slow time zone, but there's something different about this one." Zane studied the data, his brow furrowed. "The energy readings are off the charts," he muttered. "What could be causing that?" "That's what you're going to find out," Voss said, turning to face him. "I'm sending you in, Corso. We need answers, and we need them fast." Zane nodded, his pulse quickening at the prospect of another mission. He gathered his gear and headed for the hangar, and went where his sleek, black hovercraft awaited him. As he soared over the city, Zane couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The anomaly's energy signature was unlike anything he'd seen before, and the thought of what he might find sent a shiver down his spine. But Zane was the best anomaly regulator Tara had, and he'd faced countless challenges before. Whatever awaited him in Sector 47, he was ready to face it head-on. Little did he know, this mission would be the one that changed everything, setting in motion a chain of events that would threaten not only his own life, but the very fabric of time itself. Chapter 2. The hovercraft sliced through the air, its engines humming as Zane navigated the winding streets of New Cascadia's outskirts. The buildings here were smaller, more run down, a stark contrast to the sleek towers of the city center. Zane's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of the anomaly. Suddenly, his sensors pinged, and the hovercraft's display lit up with a flurry of data. The energy readings were even higher than he'd anticipated, and the air seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly glow. Zane set the hovercraft down in a clearing just outside the anomaly's perimeter. He stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel, and took a deep breath. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, and the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He pulled out his scanner and began to take readings, his eyes widening as the data streamed across the screen. The anomaly was unlike anything he'd ever seen before, a swirling vortex of energy that seemed to defy the laws of physics. As he moved closer, Zane noticed something else. The vegetation around the anomaly was lush and green, a stark contrast to the barren landscape that surrounded it. It was as if the slow time zone had created a pocket of accelerated growth, a haven of life in the midst of decay. But something else caught Zane's eye, a glint of metal in the distance. He moved closer, his hand resting on the butt of his pulse pistol, and saw a small structure nestled in the heart of the anomaly. It was a lab of some sort, its walls made of a material Zane had never seen before. The door was ajar, and he could see the flicker of screens and the hum of machinery from within. Zane's instincts told him to turn back, to report his findings to Tara and wait for backup. But his curiosity got the better of him, and he stepped inside, his pulse quickening with every step. The lab was a maze of wires and tubes, all leading to a central chamber. Zane moved closer, his eyes widening as he saw what lay within. A massive machine, its surface pulsing with energy, and a figure hunched over a console, their face obscured by a hood. Before Zane could react, the figure turned, their eyes locking with his. In that moment, Zane knew he was in trouble. The figure's eyes were cold, calculating, and they held a glint of something that sent a chill down Zane's spine. "I see you found my little project," the figure said, their voice calm and measured. "I suppose I should congratulate you, Agent Corso. Not many would have made it this far." Zane's hand tightened on his pulse pistol, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What is this place?" The figure laughed, a sound that echoed through the chamber. "Who I am is of little consequence," they said. "What matters is what I've created here. A machine that can harness the power of temporal anomalies, that can bend time to my will." Zane's mind raced with the implications of what he was hearing. If this figure was telling the truth, the consequences could be catastrophic. He had to stop them, no matter the cost. But before he could make a move, the figure's hand shot out, and Zane felt a searing pain in his chest. He looked down, his eyes widening as he saw the dart protruding from his flesh. As his vision blurred and his legs gave out, Zane heard the figure's voice, distant and mocking. "Sweet dreams, Agent Corso. When you wake up, the world as you know it will be gone, and a new era will have begun." Chapter 3. Zane's consciousness drifted in a haze of confusion and disorientation. Snippets of memories flashed through his mind. The anomaly, the lab, the hooded figure. But they were fragmented, like shards of a shattered mirror. He struggled to piece them together, to make sense of what had happened. Gradually, the fog began to lift, and Zane became aware of his surroundings. He was lying on a hard surface, his limbs heavy and unresponsive. The air was cool and damp, and the only sound was the steady drip of water somewhere in the distance. With a groan, Zane forced his eyes open, blinking against the harsh fluorescent light that flooded his vision. He was in a small, cell-like room, its walls bare and featureless. A single door stood opposite him, sealed shut with no visible handle or lock. Zane pushed himself into a sitting position, his muscles screaming in protest. His head throbbed, and his chest ached where the dart had pierced his flesh. He reached up to touch the wound, but his fingers met only smooth skin. The dart was gone, and there was no sign of injury. "What the hell?" Zane muttered, his voice rough and raspy. He staggered to his feet, using the wall for support, and made his way to the door. He ran his hands over its surface, searching for any weakness, any way to escape, but it was seamless and unyielding. Frustration and desperation welled up inside him, and Zane slammed his fist against the door, the impact sending shock waves of pain up his arm. "Let me out!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Where am I? What have you done?" There was no response, only the mocking silence of his prison. Zane slumped against the wall, his mind racing with questions and fears. How long had he been unconscious? What had the hooded figure done with their machine? What had they meant when they said the world would be different when he woke up? The thought sent a chill down Zane's spine. He had to find a way out, to stop whatever plan was in motion. But how? He was trapped, cut off from Tara and any hope of backup. Suddenly, a sound cut through the silence, a low, mechanical hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. Zane stood up straight, his senses on high alert. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and the room began to vibrate, the floor trembling beneath his feet. And then, without warning, the door slid open, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor beyond. Zane hesitated for a moment, torn between caution and the desperate need for answers. But he knew he had no choice. Whatever lay ahead, he had to face it head-on. With a deep breath, Zane stepped through the doorway, his heart pounding in his chest. The corridor stretched out before him, its walls pulsing with the same eerie energy he had sensed in the anomaly. He moved forward, his footsteps echoing in the empty space, and as he rounded a corner, he found himself face to face with a sight that made his blood run cold. The hooded figure stood before him, their face still hidden in shadow. But it was what lay behind them that caught Zane's attention. A vast chamber, filled with rows upon rows of machines, each one pulsing with the same sickly green light he had seen in the lab. And in the center of it all, a swirling vortex of energy, a temporal anomaly unlike any Zane had ever seen. It was massive, its edges flickering and shifting like the surface of a stormy sea, and Zane could feel its power even from a distance. "Welcome, Agent Corso," the figure said, their voice cold and mocking. You're just in time to witness the beginning of a new era, an era where time itself bends to my will and the world as you know it ceases to exist. Chapter 4. Zane stood frozen, his mind reeling as he tried to comprehend the scope of the hooded figure's plans. The machines pulsed and hummed around him, their energy creating a palpable tension in the air. The swirling vortex at the center of the chamber seemed to beckon him, its power both terrifying and alluring. "What have you done?" Zane demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "You can't control time. It's impossible." The hooded figure laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the chamber. "Impossible? No, Agent Corso, merely improbable, and I have made the improbable a reality." They gestured towards the machines, their movements fluid and confident. "With these devices, I can harness the power of the temporal anomalies, bending time to my will. I can create pockets of accelerated or slowed time, manipulating the very fabric of the universe." Zane's mind raced as he tried to understand the implications of the figure's words. If they could control time, the consequences would be catastrophic. They could alter the course of history, rewrite the past, and shape the future to their own twisted desires. "Why?" Zane asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this?" The figure tilted their head, regarding Zane with a mixture of amusement and contempt. "Power, Agent Corso. The power to control the very essence of existence. With this technology, I can become a god among men, shaping the world as I see fit." Zane shook his head, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I won't let you. I'll stop you, whatever it takes." The figure laughed again, the sound chilling Zane to the bone. "You? A mere anomaly regulator? You have no idea what you're up against." They stepped closer to Zane, their voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I have seen the future, Agent Corso. I have seen the world that I will create, and in that world there is no place for you or your precious agency." Zane's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to back down. He had sworn an oath to protect the timeline, to prevent anyone from abusing the power of the anomalies, and he would fulfill that oath, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. "You're wrong," Zane said, his voice steady and determined. "There will always be those who fight against tyranny and oppression, and I will stand with them, no matter the cost." The figures shook their head, a note of pity in their voice. "Such naive idealism. It will be your downfall, Agent Corso." They turned back towards the swirling vortex, their hands outstretched as if to embrace its power. "Now, witness the birth of a new era, an era where time itself is my plaything and the world bows before me." The machines around them began to hum louder, their energy building to a crescendo. The vortex pulsed and writhed, its edges expanding outwards as if it were a living, breathing entity. Zane knew he had only moments to act. He lunged forward, his hand reaching for the figure's hood, determined to unmask them and put an end to their mad scheme. But before he could make contact, the figure whirled around, their hand lashing out in a blur of motion. Zane felt a searing pain in his chest, and he looked down to see a glowing blade protruding from his flesh, its energy pulsing in time with the machines around them. As his vision began to darken, Zane heard the figure's mocking laughter echoing in his ears. "Foolish, Agent Corso, so very foolish. But don't worry. In my new world, your sacrifice will be remembered, as a footnote in the annals of history." And with those words, the world around Zane dissolved into a swirling maelstrom of light and shadow, and he knew no more. Chapter 5. Zane awoke with a gasp, his hand instinctively reaching for the wound in his chest. To his surprise, he found no trace of the glowing blade or any sign of injury. He was lying on a cold, hard surface, surrounded by an eerie silence. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he realized he was no longer in the chamber with the hooded figure and their machines. He sat up slowly, his mind struggling to make sense of his surroundings. The room he found himself in was stark and sterile, with smooth, metallic walls and a low, pulsing light emanating from the ceiling. There were no windows or doors, no discernible way in or out. Zane's thoughts raced as he tried to piece together what had happened. The last thing he remembered was the hooded figure's mocking laughter and the searing pain of the blade in his chest. But if that was the case, how had he ended up here? And where exactly was here? He pushed himself to his feet, his legs shaky and unsteady. He ran his hands along the walls, searching for any sign of a way out, but the surface was seamless and unyielding. It was as if the room had been constructed around him, trapping him inside. As he continued to explore his surroundings, a sudden realization hit him. The room, the silence, the eerie light, it all felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream. And then it dawned on him. This was the same room he had found himself in when he first woke up after the hooded figure had shot him with the dart. But how was that possible? Had he been trapped in some sort of time loop, doomed to relive the same events over and over again? Or was this all part of the hooded figure's twisted plan, a way to torment him and break his spirit? Zane refused to give in to despair. He was an anomaly regulator, trained to deal with the impossible and the improbable. He would find a way out of this room, a way to stop the hooded figure and their mad scheme. As if in response to his thoughts, the room suddenly began to shake, the walls and floor vibrating with an intense energy. Zane braced himself, his heart pounding in his chest as he waited for whatever was coming next. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. The room was plunged into darkness, and for a moment, Zane thought he had been swallowed up by the void. But then, a thin line of light appeared in front of him, growing wider and brighter until it resolved into a doorway. Zane stepped forward cautiously, his senses on high alert. The doorway led into a long, dimly lit corridor, its walls pulsing with the same energy he had felt in the room. He had no idea where it would lead him, but he knew he had no choice but to follow it. As he made his way down the corridor, Zane's mind raced with questions. What had happened to the world outside while he was trapped in that room? Had the hooded figures succeeded in their plan to control time itself? And if so, what did that mean for the future of humanity? But there was one question that loomed larger than all the others, a question that sent a chill down Zane's spine. If he had been killed by the hooded figure, then how was he still alive? And what did that mean for his role in the events that were unfolding? Zane pushed those thoughts aside. He had to focus on the task at hand, on finding a way to stop the hooded figure and their machines. The fate of the world depended on it. As he reached the end of the corridor, Zane found himself standing in front of a massive, circular door. It was made of the same strange, pulsing material as the walls, and it seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy. Zane took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay beyond. And then, with a sense of grim determination, he stepped forward and pushed the door open, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 6. Zane stepped through the circular doorway, his heart pounding in his chest as he braced himself for whatever lay ahead. To his surprise, he found himself in a vast, open chamber, its walls and ceiling stretching as far as the eye could see. The chamber was bathed in a soft, pulsing light, and the air was thick with the hum of energy. In the center of the chamber stood a massive, towering structure, its surface covered in intricate patterns and symbols that seemed to shift and change before Zane's eyes. It was like nothing he had ever seen before, a monument to some unknown power or technology that defied his understanding. As Zane approached the structure, he noticed a figure standing at its base, their back turned to him. The figure was wearing the same hooded robes as the one who had stabbed him, but something about their posture and bearing seemed different. "Welcome, Zane Corso," the figure said, their voice echoing through the chamber. "I have been expecting you." Zane's hand instinctively went to his chest, where the wound from the glowing blade should have been. "Who are you?" he demanded. "And what is this place?" The figure turned to face him, and Zane gasped in shock. The face beneath the hood was his own, but older and more weathered, with eyes that glinted with a strange, otherworldly light. "I am you," the figure said, "or rather, a version of you from a future that no longer exists." Zane's mind reeled as he tried to make sense of what he was hearing. "What do you mean, a future that no longer exists?" The figure smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The hooded figure you encountered, the one who stabbed you and left you for dead? They succeeded in their plan to control time itself. They used the temporal anomalies to create a new reality, one where they ruled as a godlike entity, shaping the world to their whims." Zane felt a chill run down his spine. "But then how am I here? How are you here?" "In that future, I was you," the figure said. "I fought against the hooded figure and their machines, But I was too late. The world was plunged into chaos, and I watched as everything I had ever known was unmade. The figure gestured to the towering structure behind them. But then I discovered this place, hidden deep within the temporal anomalies. It is a nexus point, a place where all possible timelines converge, and with the knowledge I gained here, I was able to create a new timeline, one where the hooded figure's plan never came to fruition. Zane's head was spinning. So you're saying you changed the past? But how is that possible? Anything is possible here, the figure said. But there is a price to be paid for such power. In order to create this new timeline, I had to sacrifice my own existence. I am a paradox, a being that should not exist, and my presence here is a threat to the very fabric of reality. Zane felt a sudden surge of anger. So what am I supposed to do? He demanded. Just accept this new reality and forget about everything that happened. The figure shook their head. No, Zane, your role in this is far from over. The hooded figure may have been stopped in this timeline, but their ambition and hunger for power still exist. And there are others like them, those who would seek to use the temporal anomalies for their own gain. The figure stepped closer to Zane, their eyes burning with intensity. You must become the guardian of this new reality, Zane. You must use the knowledge and power of this place to keep the temporal anomalies in check and prevent anyone from ever again threatening the fabric of time itself. Zane's mind was racing with the implications of what he was being asked to do. But he knew that he had no choice. He had been given a second chance, a chance to protect the world from those who would seek to control it. I'll do it, he said, his voice filled with determination. I'll become the guardian of this new reality, whatever it takes. The figure nodded, a hint of pride in their eyes. Then let us begin, they said, turning back to the towering structure. There is much for you to learn, and little time to waste. As Zane followed the figure deeper into the chamber, he felt a sense of purpose and destiny settling over him. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he was ready to face them head-on, armed with the knowledge and power of the temporal nexus. The fate of the world was in his hands now, and he would not let it fall. Chapter 7. Zane followed his future self deeper into the chamber, the weight of his new responsibility heavy on his shoulders. The towering structure loomed ahead, its intricate patterns and symbols pulsing with an otherworldly energy that seemed to beckon him forward. As they approached the base of the structure, a hidden panel slid open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, a series of consoles and screens flickered to life, displaying complex equations and schematics that Zane could barely begin to comprehend. This is the heart of the nexus point, his future self explained, gesturing to the consoles. From here, we can monitor the temporal anomalies and ensure that they remain stable. It is a delicate balance, one that requires constant vigilance and attention to detail. Zane stepped closer to the consoles, his eyes scanning the screens. How do I even begin to understand all of this? He asked, feeling overwhelmed by the sheer complexity of the task before him. His future self placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You will learn, Zane. The knowledge is within you, waiting to be unlocked. But first, there is something you must see. The older Zane touched a series of buttons on the console, and the screens flickered and changed. Suddenly, Zane found himself staring at a live feed of New Cascadia, the city he had sworn to protect. But something was different. The streets were empty, the buildings abandoned and crumbling. The sky above was a sickly shade of green, and the air seemed to shimmer with an unnatural haze. What happened? Zane asked, his voice barely above a whisper. This is the future that awaits if we fail, his future self said grimly. If the temporal anomalies are allowed to run unchecked, they will tear apart the fabric of reality itself. The world as we know it will cease to exist, replaced by a nightmare realm where time and space have no meaning. Zane felt a chill run down his spine as he watched the desolate cityscape on the screen. How do we stop it? By maintaining the balance, his future self replied. The temporal anomalies are like a complex web, each one connected to the others in ways that are not always apparent. If one anomaly grows too strong or too weak, it can have a cascading effect on the others, leading to chaos and destruction. The older Zane touched another series of buttons, and the screens changed once more. This time, Zane saw a map of the world, with glowing points of light scattered across its surface. Each of these points represents a temporal anomaly, his future self explained. Some are small and relatively harmless, while others are vast and powerful. It is our job to monitor them, to ensure that they remain within acceptable parameters and do not pose a threat to the stability of the timeline. Zane nodded, his mind racing with the implications of what he was being shown. And if an anomaly does start to get out of control, then we intervene, his future self said, a hard edge to his voice. We have the power to manipulate the anomalies, to strengthen or weaken them as needed. But it is a delicate process, one that requires precision and care. A single mistake could have disastrous consequences. Zane took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. I understand, he said, his voice filled with determination. I'm ready to learn, to do whatever it takes to protect this world and the people in it. His future self smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. I knew you would be, he said. Together, we will ensure that the hooded figure's vision of a world ruled by chaos and destruction never comes to pass. We will be the guardians of time itself, the protectors of all that is and all that ever will be. As Zane turned back to the consoles, ready to begin his training, he felt a sense of purpose and destiny settling over him. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. For the sake of the world and all who called it home, he would not fail. Chapter 8. As Zane immersed himself in the intricacies of the temporal anomalies, his future self guided him through the complex equations and schematics that governed their delicate balance. Hours turned into days as Zane absorbed the knowledge, his mind expanding to grasp concepts that had once seemed beyond his comprehension. Yet even as he grew more adept at navigating the Nexus Point's consoles, a nagging sense of unease lingered in the back of his mind. The hooded figure's words echoed in his thoughts, a constant reminder of the dire consequences that awaited if he failed in his mission. One day, as Zane pored over a particularly complex set of calculations, an alarm suddenly blared through the chamber. The screens flashed red, and the equations began to shift and change at an alarming rate. What's happening? Zane asked, his heart pounding in his chest. His future self rushed to the console, his fingers flying over the controls. A major anomaly is destabilizing, he said, his voice tight with tension. If we don't act quickly, it could trigger a chain reaction that would unravel the entire web. Zane watched as his future self worked frantically to stabilize the anomaly, his brow furrowed in concentration. Minutes stretched into an eternity as the alarm continued to blare, the red light bathing the chamber in an eerie glow. Finally, with a final series of keystrokes, the alarm fell silent. The screens returned to their normal color, and the equations stabilized once more. Zane let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That was close, he said, wiping the sweat from his brow. His future self nodded, his face grim. Too close, he agreed. But it's not over yet. The destabilization of that anomaly was no accident. Someone is deliberately trying to unravel the web. Zane felt a chill run down his spine. The hooded figure? Perhaps, his future self said, or someone working with them. Either way, we need to find out who's behind this and stop them before it's too late. Zane nodded, his resolve hardening. Tell me what I need to do. His future self turned to face him, his eyes blazing with determination. We need to track down the source of the destabilization, he said. It won't be easy. Whoever is behind this is clever and well hidden, but we have no choice. The fate of the world depends on it. Zane took a deep breath, steeling himself for the task ahead. I'm ready, he said. Let's do this. Together, Zane and his future self set to work, their minds and hands moving in perfect synchronicity as they delved deeper into the mysteries of the temporal anomalies. They knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but they also knew that they could not afford to fail. As they worked, Zane could feel a sense of purpose and destiny settling over him once more. He had been chosen for this task, and he would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. For the sake of the world and all who called it home, he would be the guardian of time itself, the protector of all that is and all that ever will be. Chapter 9. As the dawn broke over the horizon, Zane and his future self set out to track down the source of the anomaly's destabilization. Armed with their knowledge and determination, they ventured into the heart of the temporal nexus, their footsteps echoing through the cavernous chambers. The journey was treacherous, with each step fraught with peril. The anomalies shifted and twisted around them, their paths constantly changing as time itself seemed to warp and bend. But Zane and his future self pressed on, their minds focused on the task at hand. As they delved deeper into the nexus, they began to notice strange patterns emerging in the anomalies. The destabilizations seemed to be occurring in a specific sequence, as if someone was deliberately targeting the most critical points in the web. Whoever is behind this knows exactly what they're doing, Zane's future self muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. They're not just trying to unravel the web, they're trying to collapse it entirely. Zane felt a sense of dread settle over him at those words. If the web collapsed, the consequences would be catastrophic. Time itself would unravel, and the world as they knew it would cease to exist. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught Zane's eye. He whirled around, his heart pounding in his chest, and saw a figure darting through the shadows. It was the hooded figure, their cloak billowing behind them as they ran. "After them!" Zane shouted, sprinting forward. His future self followed close behind, and together they raced through the twisting corridors of the Nexus, their footsteps echoing off the walls. The hooded figure was fast, but Zane and his future self were faster, their bodies honed by years of training and experience. Finally, they cornered the figure in a dead-end chamber, their chests heaving with exertion. The figure turned to face them, their face still hidden beneath the hood of their cloak. "Who are you?" Zane demanded, his voice ringing out in the stillness of the chamber. "Why are you trying to destroy the anomalies?" The figure remained silent for a long moment, their head tilted to one side as if considering their response. Then, slowly, they reached up and pushed back their hood, revealing a face that was both familiar and strange. Zane gasped, his eyes widening in shock. "It can't be," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You're—" The figure smiled, a cold, cruel smile that sent shivers down Zane's spine. "Yes," they said, their voice a low, menacing growl. "I am you, Zane. Or rather, I am what you could become if you fail in your mission." Zane stared at the figure, his mind reeling with the implications of their words. How was this possible? How could he be standing face to face with a version of himself that was so twisted and corrupted? His future self stepped forward, his face grim. "You're from a different timeline," he said, his voice steady. "A timeline where Zane failed to protect the anomalies." The figure nodded, their smile widening. "In my timeline, the anomalies collapsed, and the world was plunged into chaos," they said. "I watched as everything I loved was destroyed, and I was powerless to stop it. But then I discovered a way to travel back through the anomalies that to change the course of history itself." Zane shook his head, his mind still struggling to comprehend the reality of the situation. "But why would you want to destroy the anomalies in this timeline?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why not try to fix things in your own world?" The figure laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the walls of the chamber. "Because I realize that the anomalies are a curse, not a blessing," they said. "They bring nothing but pain and suffering, and the only way to truly save the world is to destroy them once and for all." Zane and his future self exchanged a glance, their expressions grim. They knew that they had to stop this twisted version of Zane before it was too late, but how could they fight against someone who knew their every move before they made it? As if reading their thoughts, the figure's smile turned predatory. "You can't stop me," they said, their voice dripping with malice. "I am the inevitable future, and I will not rest until the anomalies are destroyed and the world is remade in my image." With those words, the figure lunged forward, their hands crackling with dark energy. Zane and his future self braced themselves for the fight of their lives, knowing that the fate of the world hung in the balance. Chapter 10. The Battle for Time. The twisted version of Zane, his eyes gleaming with malevolent intent, lunged forward, his hands crackling with dark energy. Zane and his future self leapt into action, their instincts honed by years of training and experience. They dodged the initial blast, rolling to the sides as the energy slammed into the wall behind them, leaving a scorched crater in its wake. Zane's heart pounded in his chest as he faced his corrupted counterpart, knowing that the fate of the world hung in the balance. "You can't win," the twisted Zane snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "I know every move you'll make before you even think it. I am the superior version of you, and I will not rest until the anomalies are destroyed and the world is remade in my image." Zane gritted his teeth, his determination burning bright within him. "You're wrong," he said, his voice steady and clear. "You may know my moves, but you don't know my heart. I will fight to protect the anomalies and the people who depend on them, no matter the cost." With those words, Zane and his future self launched into a flurry of attacks, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization as they struck at their enemy. The twisted Zane fought back with a fury, his dark energy lashing out in all directions, but Zane and his future self were relentless, their resolve unbreakable. The battle raged on, the chamber shaking with the force of their blows. Zane felt the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him, but he refused to falter. He knew that he was fighting not just for himself, but for the countless lives that depended on the anomalies for their very existence. As the fight reached its climax, Zane saw an opening in his enemy's defenses. With a final, desperate lunge, he struck out with all his might, his fist connecting with the twisted Zane's jaw in a sickening crunch. The corrupted version of Zane stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. For a moment, it seemed as though he might recover, but then his body began to shimmer and fade, the dark energy that had sustained him dissipating into the air. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "This cannot be. I am the inevitable future." But even as he spoke, his form continued to dissolve, until nothing remained but a faint wisp of smoke that drifted away on the breeze. Zane stood there, his chest heaving with exertion, as his future self placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You stopped him." Zane nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. But even as he savored the victory, he knew that the battle was far from over. The anomalies were still in danger, and there were countless other threats lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of respite, knowing that he had faced his darkest fears and emerged triumphant. He had proven that he was more than just a pawn in the game of time, but a true guardian of the anomalies and the people who depended on them. As he and his future self made their way back through the temporal nexus, Zane felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For he was Zane, the protector of the anomalies, and he would stop at nothing to ensure that the world remained safe and secure, no matter what the cost. Chapter 11. The Aftermath. Zane and his future self emerged from the temporal nexus, the weight of their victory heavy on their shoulders. The twisted version of Zane had been defeated, but the cost had been high. The chamber lay in ruins, the walls scorched and crumbling from the intense battle that had just taken place. As they stepped out into the sunlight, Zane felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The fight had taken everything he had, both physically and emotionally. He leaned against a nearby wall, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. His future self looked at him with concern. "You did well, Zane," he said softly, "but the battle is far from over. The anomalies are still in danger, and there are others out there who would seek to exploit them for their own gain." Zane nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I know," he said, "but we can't let that happen. We have to find a way to protect them, to keep them safe from those who would abuse their power." His future self smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "And we will," he said. "Together, we will find a way to ensure that the anomalies remain a haven for those who need them most." As they made their way back to the city, Zane's mind raced with possibilities. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The city was in chaos when they arrived, the streets filled with panicked citizens and overwhelmed authorities. News of the Twisted Zane's defeat had spread quickly, but so too had rumors of other threats lurking in the shadows. Zane and his future self wasted no time in getting to work. They met with the leaders of the anomaly communities, sharing what they had learned and devising strategies to keep the anomalies safe. It was a daunting task, but Zane refused to let the weight of his responsibilities crush him. He knew that he had a duty to the people who depended on him, and he would not rest until he had fulfilled that duty. Days turned into weeks as Zane and his future self worked tirelessly to fortify the anomalies and root out any potential threats. They faced countless challenges and setbacks, but they never wavered in their resolve. And slowly but surely, their efforts began to bear fruit. The anomalies grew stronger and more stable, the communities that depended on them thriving in the face of adversity. Zane knew that there would always be those who sought to exploit the anomalies for their own gain, but he also knew that he would always be there to stop them. He was the protector of the anomalies, and he would never abandon his post. As he stood atop a hill overlooking the city, the sun setting in the distance, Zane felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but he knew that he was not alone. He had his future self by his side, and the strength and resolve of the anomaly communities behind him. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, and they would emerge victorious. For in the end, the power of the anomalies was not in their ability to bend time and space, but in the hope and resilience of the people who called them home. Chapter 12. A New Dawn. As the sun rose over the city, Zane stood on the balcony of his apartment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The events of the past few weeks had taken their toll on him, both physically and mentally, but he knew that he couldn't afford to rest. The anomalies were still in danger, and there was so much work to be done. A knock on the door startled him out of his thoughts. He turned to see his future self standing in the doorway, a concerned look on his face. "You haven't slept in days," he said softly. "You need to rest, Zane. You can't keep pushing yourself like this." Zane shook his head. "I can't rest," he said. "Not when there's so much at stake. The anomalies need us, now more than ever." His future self sighed. "I know," he said, "but you're no good to anyone if you're running on empty. Take a few hours, get some sleep. The world will still be here when you wake up." Zane hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "You're right," he said. I feel like I'm letting them down if I'm not out there, fighting for them." "You're not letting anyone down," his future self said firmly. "You've done more for the anomalies than anyone else, and you'll continue to do so, but you need to take care of yourself first." Zane allowed himself to be led back inside, his exhaustion finally catching up with him. As he lay down on the bed, his eyes heavy with fatigue, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. There was still so much work to be done, so many threats to face. But as he drifted off to sleep, he felt a sense of hope wash over him. He knew that he wasn't alone in this fight. He had his future self by his side, and the strength and resilience of the anomaly communities behind him. And when he woke, he would be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He would continue to fight for the anomalies, to protect them from those who sought to exploit them. He would be their champion, their guardian. For in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the power of the anomalies themselves, but the people who depended on them. The families and communities that had found refuge within their boundaries, the lives that had been saved and transformed by their existence. And as long as there were people who needed the anomalies, Zane would be there to fight for them. No matter the cost, no matter the danger, he would stand tall and defend them with every ounce of his strength. For that was his purpose, his calling. He was the protector of the anomalies, the guardian of the Chrono Havens, and he would fulfill that role until his dying breath. As he slept, the city buzzed with activity. The anomaly communities worked tirelessly to fortify their defenses, to prepare for the challenges that lay ahead. They knew that the road would be long and hard, but they also knew that they had a champion in Zane. And with him by their side, they knew that anything was possible. They would weather any storm, face any danger, and emerge stronger and more united than ever before. For in the end, that was the true power of the anomalies. Not the ability to manipulate time and space, but the hope and resilience that they inspired in the hearts of those who called them home. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its warm glow over the city, that hope burned brighter than ever before. A new dawn was coming, and with it the promise of a better future for all who had found shelter within the Chrono Havens.